Thank you for visiting Past the Wire TV, the YouTube channel of PastTheWire.com.
Don't miss the best Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks seminar in the game, only on PastTheWire.com. We'll have analysis of the Run for the Roses, selections, horses to play against, ticket structure, good singles, bad singles, and how to manage your bankroll on racing's biggest day. Reserve your seat now at PastTheWire.com.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Past the Wire TV, our second Kentucky Derby Radar edition, number 2, 2023. The preps are in full swing. With Jim Gazzale, Jeff Metz, and we'll start, I guess, with a recap of the Risen Star, talk about some of the upcoming preps, the contenders, the pretenders, and see where we go as we follow the Kentucky Derby lead up and the Kentucky Derby Trail.
Yeah, I think the Risen Star, as we've probably all watched that, probably 24 times now, trying to figure out who's who through all the darkness there, adjusting our TVs or phones or brightness on our computer screens, trying to make heads or tails of who it is coming through horses down the stretch. But I think to your point, John, there's a lot to unpack out of that race. Not only with the winner, Angel of Empire, but a lot of the horses that finished in behind him, who's staying on the trail, who is off the trail for the Kentucky Derby. So let's start with the winner. John, did anything stick out to you about Angel of Empire? Were you impressed? Were you not impressed? Where'd you land once they crossed the wire?
I wasn't impressed with him going into the race. I wasn't impressed really with him coming out of the race. I felt about that race going in, and I think Jeff and I discussed it on last week's Kentucky Derby Radar 1 show. I kind of thought that a long shot or somebody was going to pop up in that race. I didn't like any of the figure horses. And I very rarely wager at the fairgrounds, and I never have any luck there. And I stayed true to form because I think I was alive with 5 of the 11 or 12 horses, and I didn't have the winner. I did have the second horse, Ken McPeak's horse, but that didn't matter because you need the winner to cash. But I thought the winner got a nice setup. It played into his hands. Brad Cox is on fire at the fairgrounds. Luis Saez, I believe, rode the winner. He's about as strong as finisher in the game, and tough to beat coming down the lane when he's on a closer, and there's been some speed in there. So I don't think that the top Derby horses were in that race. I think there's a lot to be seen yet, and I'm not on his bandwagon after the race, and I wasn't on it before the race.
Jeff?
My takeaway from the race was, watching it early stages of the race going into the first turn, I thought, well, it's a big group of horses. They're all kind of fanning out all over, and it definitely was going to give them the feel of a big field on Kentucky Derby Day. So some of the horses, if they can take a step forward, they were going to get a lot of experience out of that. I was very surprised how dark it was. So I assumed for the jockeys, it was pretty dark too. Just late in the day, evening, and it was like morning workouts when the lights aren't on yet. So it was just kind of interesting to watch. But like you said, how often do you get a fairly decent price on a Brad Cox horse? But, it popped up, and especially where he's red hot at the fairgrounds.
Yeah, it's an interesting time frame in the road to the Kentucky Derby. Like, John, you and I shared in the Kentucky Derby wagering guide that you just put out on PastTheWire.com recently. Now's about the time where we start to see the cream rise to the top, right? You're going to look back mostly at the final 2 prep races. So we all probably thought Victory Formation would have had a little bit of a better showing coming out of his prior start. but wasn't all there. And it seems like some quotes from Brad Cox after the Risen Star might suggest he doesn't know where he's going to go with this horse next. Anybody else outside of the winner that stick out to you that, hey, they might be rounding into Derby quality form here as we look ahead to, for seemingly a lot of these coming out of this race, the Louisiana Derby, the Arkansas Derby, perhaps the Bluegrass? Anybody else out of this race stick out to you?
I think he would have to take a big step forward, and I thought that he should have run better the last two times, and I think his name is Tappett's Conquest. Is that the name of the other Brad Cox horse? I thought that horse was live going into the race off his trip in the race prior to that, which I didn't think was the best, and I thought it was a trip that he would really learn something from and benefit from, and I expected a better finish and a better showing from him in the Risen Star, and he really didn't do it. I don't know if there's an excuse or not. When I watched the replay, I really didn't see one. He just didn't seem to have the kind of punch that I would have expected him to have and didn't take that forward step. Can it still be there? Maybe, but it would have to be even more significant now than it would have had been, in the Risen Star. So I've surely got my doubts. But nobody else really jumped out at me. I didn't like Victory Formation going into the race. I certainly don't like him coming out of it. I thought he was for sure overrated. Larry Ravelli's Maiden made a big move, looked at one point like he was making a winning type of move and couldn't close the deal. That's a horse I think if they step back and give him a confidence builder, which I think is tough to do with the points, because you then might have to run, two more times when, ideally you might only want to run once. But I think that horse has more to show us. But I think he would need,
fills.
Yes, I think he would need, and he's got, I guess he's I guess maybe they can give him a confidence builder. He's got 23 points. So I guess he can get in, but I would like to see them put him in a softer spot, give him some confidence, and maybe see what he can do. But other than that, coming out of the Risen Star, I'm not sold on the Derby winner being in that field.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I would think, Tooth Phil's right now with 23 points, probably a good shot to be in that, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 range on the leaderboard. So I wasn't ultra impressed with him, but I thought his race one start back was good. And then I thought he followed it up with, a pretty even effort. I don't know that he necessarily progressed off of that last effort in the Risen Star, but I don't think he was too bad the other day. He might be one, like you said, if he lands in a little bit of a softer spot that I'd be interested in. However, to your point too, John, you're caught up in Derby fever. You've probably got a decent number of points to be on the cusp of getting into the field. I don't know anybody that would be in that position that would willingly put them off the Derby trail with the prospect of, potentially running third or fourth in the Louisiana Derby, let's say, which, certainly possible for this horse. That would guarantee you a spot in the starting gate at Churchill Downs. So I guess we'll see what happens there. Jeff, any other horses from the Risen Star stick out to you that you might be interested in moving forward, or horses that might have shown a little bit to suggest that they might progress with one prep left before the first Saturday in May?
No, horse-wise, no. But one of the things that I think, like we talked about, Luis Saez. So now, he's going to have a lot of opportunity mounts. So, where he goes next after winning it with this horse. Also, Flavian Pratt. So that horse didn't show up like they had hoped. So I'm sure Flavian will start looking for something else as well. And, we talked just before the show, we got a big lineup of stakes races coming up in the next 1 or 2 weeks. So I think that, this is, like you said, the cream is really going to rise to the top. And you can see how they formulate the numbers. The points they get bigger as you get closer to the race. So like I stated last time, it's almost like a win and you're in. If you win one of these the last couple of preps, you get enough points and you kind of have an automatic berth into the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah.
Jeff, as a trainer, is there anything in your opinion to my suggestion that sometimes when you have a horse like Larry Ravelli's horse that's kind of on the verge of cracking through, but is really running like he's a cut below some of the top contenders, that if you actually take a step back, give him a confidence builder where he can actually win back against straight maidens, or even, an allowance race or something, to get that confidence back, and then go back in against the quote, big boys or the wolves. Can that be beneficial? And I mean, like Jim pointed out, a lot of trainers might be reluctant to take that step back, figuring they lose ground or lose a shot at getting in the gate. But can it be beneficial from a training and horse development standpoint?
So I think you definitely you got to start with the main part of the equation, and that's the horse. So how is this horse's constitution? Does he eat up good after his races? Is he carrying good weight? Are his legs in good shape? No issues that we're dealing with. So I think once you start with the horse, and if you say this horse is hardy, he didn't miss an oat after the race, and he came out in great shape, he was bouncing. So once the horse is in good shape, I think you could map out two roads you could go down towards the Kentucky Derby. And one would be to drop back to a maiden race and try and get that win where you're probably 2 to 5. And then you get that confidence booster of that maiden win. And if you have time to fit in one more prep race that you could win or hit the board. And like Jim said, you're probably going to have enough points to sneak in through, stall 20, stall 19. But ideally, if you could get that horse's confidence up. But then again, if you're trying to squeeze 2 races in and make it to the Kentucky Derby, that's going to be a lot to ask of a young 3-year-old that has to run 1.25 miles for the first time. So that's the one road where you're kind of rushing and trying to squeeze a couple of races. Or you take your best shot, you get him as fresh and as happy and doing well as you can. You pick whatever prep that you think would be, I don't want to say easiest, because there's no easy prep races for the Kentucky Derby, but you're going to go to your spot where you think we're going to dodge some of the major big players. And if you went to that race and you were able to earn first, second, or third and get those Derby points, you roll into the Derby, a little fresher without trying to squeeze 2 races in, and you can take your best shot in the Derby. And who wouldn't want to break their maiden in the Kentucky Derby?
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure.
But I think you got to go to the horse. What's his constitution? Can he hold up with that much racing? Does he ship well? Does he only like his home track? Some of those things. But those would be questions we'd have to ask the trainer, because, he's with the horse every day. He knows what he's seeing from the horse. And, but we saw it with Known Agenda. They dropped him into allowance because he had, and then he, was able to get tremendous confidence, and then he just kept on rolling.
Number 1 is Mo Donegal by Uncle Mo. And they're off in the Remsen. As they come on for the finish, and it's going to be tight here in the Remsen. Mo Donegal bearing down on the outside. It's Mo Donegal and early voting, and it is Mo Donegal to win the Wood Memorial. And it will be Mo Donegal to win the Test of the Champion, the Belmont Stakes.
one thing that a lot of horse players, gamblers in general, fall into the trap of this so-called recency bias, right? We see horses that perform well in their last race and they get bet heavily in their next start. Last year, the road to the Kentucky Derby that went through Louisiana, people talked about like it was the best string of horses in the country competing down there on that circuit. And I think a lot of that held true. Jon, from a handicapping standpoint, the Risen Star, obviously at Fairgrounds in New Orleans, do you feel like there might be an opportunity moving forward when you look at the Louisiana Derby, or I would imagine a bunch of the horses out of the Risen Star might ship a bit north to the Arkansas Derby? Do you feel like there's an opportunity, because everybody was so high on, Epicenter, for example, or other horses coming out of running at Fairgrounds? Is there an opportunity in these other like final prep races coming up where the money behind some of the horses shipping out of Fairgrounds or continuing to run there might be a bit inflated because of what we saw there last year? Do you feel like that plays a role in the everyday handicappers agenda? And is that something that you might be able to take advantage of? Or do you think I'm totally off base in thinking that year over year?
I don't think you're off base, and I think it's an interesting question. And I would selfishly say that I hope that it works that way, because I would try and take advantage of that for sure. I don't put any extra weight on a lot of that stuff. I think that changes from year to year, where the better horses are and the different paths that they take. And I've noticed something that's becoming a little bit more of a trend the past couple of years than we've seen in the past. You see horses, you used to see horses traditionally prep at one circuit. They would follow the New York path, the Florida path, the Arkansas path, the California path, the Louisiana path to the Derby. Now you see horses kind of shifting all over, from Gulfstream to Tampa, from Arkansas to the Fairgrounds. Now you'll see some from the Fairgrounds go to Arkansas. They don't necessarily stay on that same state progressive Derby trail like they used to. You see a lot of guys changing it up and adjusting to the timing of the races. And I think more people put more into today than they used to. Horses liking a certain track. There was a while when you had a run of a lot of Derby success coming out of the Arkansas Derby, and was it the timing of the race or the fact that Oaklawn has a very similar type of dirt track to Churchill Downs, or maybe a combination of both? But I think now you're seeing a lot more shifting around of the horses and where they run, as opposed to staying on a one state path. So I would love to see people gravitate and think that, the Fairgrounds had all the good horses last year, and Epicenter came out of there last year, and, weigh those horses heavily, because from what I've seen, and I don't know who's going to run into the Louisiana Derby yet, but the LeCompte and the Risen Star didn't impress me as hosting the likely Derby winner. So with that said, I would love to see that happen, and I hope it does. I don't know that it will, but I hope it does. I'm excited about the Rebel this coming weekend. I think there's some huge potential in the Rebel with a couple of horses, on the heels of that, we've got the Gotham. We've got the Fountain of Youth and the Tampa Bay Derby, but it starts the next big one is the Rebel.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So we've all heard that Brad Cox's barn is loaded of high quality 3-year-olds, bulk of them on the Kentucky Derby trail. He's got 2 in there. in the Rebel coming up this weekend at Oaklawn Park, Verifying and Giant Mischief. I'm rooting for Giant Mischief. I've got a nice Kentucky Derby future wager on him at 40, 50 to 1, something like that. So I'm looking forward to seeing him run. But I think there is a lot of intrigue in that race with those two that I just mentioned. We've got a couple of horses, namely Reincarnate, transferring out of the Bob Baffert barn. And then there's just a variety of some interesting jockey choices, I think, in that race as well. So, Jeff, if you've had an opportunity to look at the field for the Rebel coming up, anything jump off the page at you as you took a quick glance at it?
Yeah, like you mentioned, it is interesting that the ruling came out where the Bob Baffert trainees would have to transfer, and it's interesting some of the spots where they went. But I'm wishing the best for everybody as they move forward. I've always liked Reincarnate, and I'm also Giant Mischief. I like those would probably be who I like moving forward as we go down the Derby road here.
John, anything jump off the page when you were looking at it?
A couple of things, and I certainly don't want to rain on your parade on Giant Mischief, but to me, when you look at a horse like Giant Mischief, okay, he ran very, very well and very, very fast as a 2-year-old, and he's coming off what I thought was a pretty troubled trip in the Remington Park race at the Springboard Mile. I think it's interesting that Florent Giroux winds up on Brad Cox's other horse when he's kind of his main rider, and he reaches out for Irad Ortiz to ride this horse. Does that mean that he's loyal to Giroux and Giroux is on the one they like more? Or does that mean he's going for the best guy for the horse he thinks is the best and going for Irad? And that's something that, unless you're really tight with Brad Cox, is probably never going to come out accurately publicly. That's one of those things that those who know don't say, and those who say don't know. So we probably won't know the answer to that question, but we'll see how the race plays out. But to me, if Giant Mischief is as good a horse as his 2-year-old form suggests, then something has to happen on Saturday to convince me of that. Good horses, when they make their 3-year-old debut, always run better or equal to, but usually better than their best start at 2. So theoretically, he should run a faster, better race than he ever ran at 2 if he's progressed and if he's a good horse. He's not going to come back needing a race. If he runs slower or not as good as he did at 2, and you're looking for him to take a step forward, can it happen? Yeah, but if he's a real quality horse and a Derby type winning horse, he's going to go forward off that race, off his best 2-year-old race, first time at 3, and that means he should run a huge race on Saturday and be a handful. My thought is, prove it to me, because they started this horse out at Indiana, not a top circuit. He won. They ran him back at Keeneland, not in a stake, an allowance. He won. Then they went to the Remington Park race, not really where you send your first stringers, and he ran a bang up second. He's bred. He's got a lot of things going for him, but because of all of those factors, I say prove it. There are 2 horses that jump off the page to me. One of them I have concerns about, and it's no knock on Tim Yakteen whatsoever, but you can't argue with Bob Baffert's record at Arkansas and in the Kentucky Derby. And if he still trained Reincarnate, I would like him a lot more than I do. And again, it's nothing against Tim Yakteen. It's just really a plug for Bob's success and knowing these horses and his knack of winning these type of races. My knock on Reincarnate is he come out of a 5-horse field race where Bob had 4 of them, and I'm pretty sure he liked the other 3 better than he did Reincarnate. And Reincarnate jumped up and won and surprised everybody, myself included. that's a bit of a question mark to me. And the fact that he changes barns, but I do like these good magics. I do like the Scat Daddy on the bottom. I was very impressed with his last race. I like that he's able to sit close, but not have to go for the lead and make a move. But, and I expect him to run well. If Bob trained him, I think he would be the horse to beat, despite some of the other horses in the race and despite the Cox horses. But there is a barn change, and I factor everything. The horse I like a lot, and I think is really going to take a big step up, and is going to put himself square in the mix of the potential Derby contenders, is Gun Pilot, Steve Asmussen's horse. He really hasn't had a break yet. He started late in November, ran November, January, February. So he really hasn't had that 2 to 3 layoff. He started late. But I like the way he's coming around. My question mark is, Steve's horses get bet, and he was 11-1 first time out. But if memory serves correct, I think Steve was in like a ridiculous slump at that point and just couldn't win a race at Churchill Downs, and was like, for I don't even know how many, and this horse managed to win. So maybe he was a little overlooked because of that. But, I think he's coming around. I like the fact that he showed speed when they stretched him out going a mile, lost to the Brad Cox horse, but then came back and Santana took him off the pace, and he really, really responded. I think he's coming around. We know what the gun runners have been doing. He's bred to improve as they go longer and as they progress. And I think he's sitting on another big race and a forward move. If you can continue that kind of progress from now till the first Saturday in May, that's a whole nother question mark, because he really hasn't had the benefit of a layoff and won't have that like some of these others will. But Steve knows what he's doing, and when he gets him good, he knows how to keep him good. And, this is a horse that's definitely on my radar Saturday as a horse that's, very eligible to step up and win this race, and all of a sudden be on the board and be in the conversation of a Derby contender.
I've got 2 questions, one for each of you before we move along here. Just John, real quick, still on Gun Pilot. Does the fact that Verifying beat him by more than 5 lengths, 2 starts back, does that concern you at all? To be about 6 weeks ago, I guess. Does that give you any pause?
No. I love it. And I'll tell you why. Well, when he beat him, Gun Pilot was coming off 1 race, a maiden win at Churchill Downs. Verifying was coming off a win at Saratoga, first time out. We know what the maidens are like at Saratoga. He was coming off a second in the Champagne. We know what kind of horses are in the Champagne. And then he was coming off a little bit of a dull effort, but he was bumped and bothered at the start in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. We know what kind of horses are in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. We've got Cave Rock, National Treasure, and Forte. All 3 of those would be amongst the favorites of this race. So he had a lot more seasoning, a lot more experience, a lot more under his belt when he when he faced Gun Pilot. Gun Pilot was off that 1 maiden win. Cox brings them back ready. So the layoff from the Breeders' Cup, to January was nothing in my book. He had every right to go forward. Got a beautiful trip that day. He was first time Lasix. Had a lot going for him. And I think he was expected to win that day. I think Gun Pilot showed that he got a lot out of that race by coming back, sitting off the pace, rallying and win. And I think he turns the tables on him, no problem.
Yeah, I think that's some good insights. You can deduce all of that from looking at the PPs, but that's where you're being a seasoned veteran of reading through the racing form kind of pops out, right? I think for me, I look and I see, Verifying, wipe the floor with him a few stars back, and you're like, yeah, but here's why. And I think that's top quality analysis that you're probably not finding anywhere else.
I appreciate that, and hopefully I'm not humbled by those statements come Saturday night, because there are very few sure things in horse racing. One of them is that at some point horses will humble everybody, no matter how good you may or may not be. So we'll see what happens. But to stay on point and answer your question, I've got no reservations about that defeat to verifying that day at all. I actually like it because I think it'll help my price on Gunpile.
Yeah. Jeff, question for you. So looking at Giant Mischief, like I said, I'm a little bit biased. I got a Derby future on him, which John thinks I just lit my money on fire, but we'll cross that bridge in a couple of weeks, I guess. So I do know that Giant Mischief has been working with Victory Formation, who didn't have the greatest of runs a few days back in the Risen Star. Is there anything that we can pull from that? Two horses are working together. They've got races a week or two apart coming up. If you see one horse doesn't perform up to the level that you might suspect or anticipate it, is that a knock on his workmate moving forward, or are they two completely separate animals and we shouldn't read too far into it that way?
Well, it's interesting that, looking at Giant Mischief, I have it in front of me now. And so he's been working at the fairgrounds, and now he's going to come up to Oaklawn and race. But the thing that jumps out at me is Irad Ortiz. Irad Ortiz is coming to ride this horse. Yes, he's probably a first call for some other barns, but for him to land on this horse says a lot to me. As far as the workmates, I think it's different complexions, because even though they might work 59-4, I didn't see any video on the workout, but they're quality horses and they can go fast. So they can work 59-4 probably pretty easy. And they could work heads up. One might do it a little easier than the other. But when it comes to the races, I think that's where it's going to be. This horse likes to come off the pace a little bit. Irad Ortiz is going to get a pace to run at here, and he's a super strong finisher. So, my glaring thing here is the first time Irad Ortiz. So that's why I like him. Reincarnate, I think that, we spoke about him, and John did, the trainer transfer. But Tim Yakteen was the assistant trainer for Bob Baffert for many years. So I don't think he loses much in the transition there. And I know last year he had all the hype because he got the horse for the Kentucky Derby, and it didn't, I think it's the kiss of death when they do stories on you and they come and interview you and they do all this. The hype was there. So he really was set up for a fall, in my opinion. But this Reincarnate, he was 16-1 last time and he ran a good race. But this horse is loaded with high-priced horses. And going back to your point about Indiana Grand or, Horseshoe, it's pretty rare you see a $475,000 debut runner there. But, Brad, that's where he started him. And he's been no 2 wins in a second. So half a length off of being undefeated. So I'm going to jump on board with Jim here. I'm going to back it up with Reincarnate again, John Velasquez. So, I hate to let the jockey agents handicap for me, but I think they know what they're doing. These are top riders and they're not sending them in here for nothing. And if you look at the purse, and I'm surprised, not like you said, Martin Garcia rode Verifying last time. Rosario's ridden him in the past. And but he's going to get Florent Giroux, who rode the other horse. So it is always funny, like we spoke coming up, when you start having 3 and 4 Derby preps, now these jockeys have to decide, who's my main horse, and I have to go where that horse is running. I can't ride all 4, and I might have one that I previously ridden in each race. But so for me, I'm rooting for your early Derby play. I'm rooting for you to make some money. John, who did you actually take in this race? Who was your Gun Pilot, or did you have somebody else that you really landed on if you could only pick one horse?
Gun Pilot.
Okay. Good.
Gun
I mean, if I'm looking at Gun Pilot, you got gun runners who've they're doing great. You know, the Curlins, the gun runners, they're doing fantastic. You got Santana's ridden this horse every time, 2 wins in a second, like the other ones. He was obviously, and he's already won here at Oaklawn Park. Now, like you said, he's been going right along, but he started in November. He had December off, and he's run a race in January. This will be his second start in February. But also, for what it's worth, you know, he was boxed in a little bit, and he still he won very nicely. So, you know, I could see. I think we might have the trifecta here.
I wouldn't mind seeing it. And, you know, to your point, even Pratt shows up on a horse for Rudolph Brissett. He rides, you know, Talladega, just coming off a maiden win. So it just goes to show how these top riders are taking calls in these big prep races, just looking for that Derby horse, because you really never know where it's going to come from. You know, Pratt's obviously got a lot of options, a lot of choices, and an agent whose phone's probably ringing off the hook takes this horse. You know, so everybody's looking for a Derby horse. Nobody really knows where it's going to come from yet. And you know, I said this on our Derby Radar 1 show. I'll say it again. I do think this is the year that, you know, somebody unexpected is going to emerge out of these preps that's not really being talked about, and wind up being a hot horse going forward. I didn't think it was going to happen last week in the Rizzo Talk, but I think it's very possible that it's that Gun Pilot falls into that role. So
the interesting thing is, so Flavien Prat, he won on this horse last time out. He broke his maiden at Oaklawn Park. So he probably was in to ride a stake race later in the day. And his agent said, hey, I'm going to be in town if you need us for anything. And so he picked up a mount on this horse. And this is how it moves forward, you know, where, hey, I don't have a mount in this race. If you'd like us, we'd love to be there. Another side note, sometimes you'll see these jockeys like Martin Garcia riding the one horse Verifying. And this past weekend, Mike Smith, you know, with weather delays, he wasn't able to get to Oaklawn Park. His flight got canceled. And so he wasn't able to ride a horse for Mark Gladbach there at Oaklawn Park. And so sometimes these things happen. The jockeys can't get there. You know, they're riding on Saturday. They leave late at night or early in the morning. But if there's a weather delay, they can't get there. So a jockey like Martin Garcia jumps on board. You know, you saw the early one, Verifying. Rosario rode it quite a bit. And then, you know, so, but Martin was able to get the call. So sometimes these things are out of the jockey's control, but other times, like I kind of lean on the agents knowing which horses they want to ride. They want to get to the best possible. But as we said, moving forward, they're going to have harder choices as we get closer to the Derby.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll add about that I see talked about on social media a lot, and I think is misunderstood and misconstrued by a lot of people. And Jeff, you can weigh in and say if you agree or disagree. But a lot of times people will talk about riders. Well, you know, he might not think this horse is better, but he's got to ride this horse because he rides for that barn all year long. And there's a lot of times I think that holds true. When you have an allegiance to a barn and you ride first or second call for a barn, you may ride a horse that you might not think is as good, even in a stake, to keep that relationship with that barn or not, you know, ruffle the feathers or disrupt the water. I think one of the exceptions to that rule is the Derby. I think it's pretty much understood between riders, agents, and trainers that, hey, for the Derby, you're going to take your best shot and I'm not going to hold it against you if you take off my horse. And I think that goes back to a conversation I heard many, many years ago hanging around the backstretch, when Shane Sellers was still riding and was riding a horse named Pulpit for Frankie Brothers in Claiborne Farm. And I just happened to be hanging around the barn, and I was friendly with Shane. He used to ride horses for me with Peter Walder back then. And, you know, he had ridden Pulpit, and Pulpit was a late comer. I think he just broke his maiden and was running back in the Fountain of Youth, or he might have won the Fountain of Youth, and it was for the Florida Derby, but it was early in his career. And I remember he walked in, and Frankie walked out and said to him, say, listen, you do you take the best horse, man. Friendship, everything else aside, it's the Kentucky Derby. You ride who you think is going to win. There's no, you know, no loyalty, allegiance, or nothing like that for this race. This is the Derby. You do what you think is best. And Shane was like, no, I'm riding him. That's you know, that's who I want to ride. So I think a lot of times people read into some of these rider decisions in the Derby thinking that, well, it's about loyalty, or it's about, you know, a relationship with a barn. I think that goes out the window in the Derby. I think it's pretty much understood that even if a guy's your guy and he's your right, if he's got a shot to ride a horse he may think is better in the Derby, you're not going to hold it against him and take him off anybody else in the barn. Is that accurate in your opinion on the backside, Jeff?
Yeah, I think that definitely, you know, there's loyalty, and then there's the big races like the Breeders' Cup and the Kentucky Derby. So there's loyalty, like, hey, I've been riding this horse, I'm going to keep riding it and stuff like that. And I think what happens in some of these cases, like we're talking about these, is I think the jockeys and the agents together as a team, they have to decide who is our best horse and our best chance of winning. So we're talking about the Kentucky Derby. So they have to map out, okay, I have 3 potential prospects I can ride in the Kentucky Derby. Now, when the first Saturday in March and the first Saturday in April, where we know there's a lot of prep races, when their main player, they have to start to make a decision, because they have to say, hey, I think our best chance is this horse, and we got to ride this one. So the other 2 are going to get picked up by other jockeys, because the jockey can only be in one track at a time. And if these horses, even if they're in the same race, he can only ride one horse. So the jockey has to decide who's our best chance. They talk it over with the agent. The agent's checking the numbers, the thoroughgraphs, the rags, talking with the trainer. How's it training? They're even in there talking to the groom and the assistant. You know, hey, how's the horse doing? How's he eating up? How's the legs? Because if there's a blip in the radar, that horse is not going to make it to the finish line, which is the Kentucky Derby in this instance. So they want to get all the pieces to the puzzle so they make the best possible decision for the jockey, because a lot of these jockeys, it's not about money anymore. They've done very well for their careers. So now it's about winning the classics. If you can put a Kentucky Derby on your resume, that's something special, and the money will follow. But I think definitely what you said, you know, there's a spot to loyalty, and then there's a time where, you know, you do what's best for you, no hard feelings. I'm going to ride you in 3 other races on the undercard, and I'm going to wish you the best of luck, but I'm going to be competing against you with my horse. And I think as we're in the business longer and you get to be a little older, for myself, speaking of my experience, you know, early on, you're like, oh man, this guy took off. You're mad at him. You're never going to ride him again. But then as you get older, you're like, you know what? That was the best for you. And sometimes things work out because another jockey gets on board and he actually gets along better with the horse, or the trip worked out better, or who knows? Now you have a new relationship with the jockey. So I think sometimes you got to let fate and Mother Nature do its thing, and you just, you know, hope for the best, because you and I, all 3 of us, know how much luck there's involved with horse racing. So things really have to fall into place, and you try to make your best educated guess, like we do with handicapping, and then you hope things play out. But people, even when you're low odds, I say, hey, good luck, I think you got it. And you say, well, there's still need some racing luck on our side.
Jim, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
If you were an owner, okay, and had a horse that was on a Derby trail, okay, everybody wants the best rider they could get. Now, let's say in a prep like the Sam Davis or one of these early preps, a guy like Irad or Jose Ortiz or Luis Saez is open, okay? And he says, you know what, I'll ride your horse and see how good he is, you know? Now, to you, he's your horse and he's special, and you may know he's progressing and he's going to get a little bit better, but those guys got the pick of the litter, okay? but he says he'll ride your horse. Knowing that there's a shot if he doesn't run really well or runs the kind of race he can build off that you're happy with, but that one of those guys will jump off to ride somebody better, would you rather have a guy like that, or would you rather have somebody who might be a lesser name but says, you know what, I'll give you the call for that race and I'll ride him in the Derby? You know what I mean? You got me as long as you want me. Which way would you go as an owner if that was you? And same thing for you afterwards, Jeff. I'm curious your take as a trainer.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's like it's almost like a delayed gratification sort of thing, right? Do you want the top rider on a horse in a prep race that you feel like has got a good shot, only to be disappointed when the horse either doesn't run well or it wins, and then the rider jumps off for the perception of being on a better horse? I don't know. I mean, me personally, I feel like I'm a loyal guy. Relationships mean a lot to me. So if I could build a personal relationship and a good rapport with a rider that, I knew was going to reciprocate that level of loyalty, I would probably lean in that direction. But it's always exciting going into the gate, knowing you've got one of the top riders and, seeing your horse take some money. So, I think I would probably lean with, maybe the second tier rider for the long term. But, I think having a top rider would certainly be exciting as hell too.
And you know how cutthroat this is. And Jeff, you could weigh in on this. The second tier rider wins, and now your horse is one of the hot horses for the Derby. Your phone's ringing off the hook from these guys that would have took off and left you in a lurch in a minute. And now they're calling saying, hey, I'm opening there. I got the best rider in the country. You got to take that other guy off and put me on. Come on. What's the matter with you? This is not about loyalty. This is about your shot to win the Derby. You want the best guy you could have on your horse. That's what happens. I mean, Jeff, we'll weigh in. You know how this is played back there. I've seen all of that stuff, go down, and I've seen even big name riders get taken off.
Yeah, these agents, they're checking the charts, watching the races, watching the replays, and they're looking, in case their horse runs bad, they're saying, hey, we want to ride yours back, not that one we just rode. And when you're talking the Derby and they want to take the best horse, but in any event, I try to be loyal. So whoever won in that early prep race, I would stick with them through the long run. And some of these riders, some of the trainers, I'll say, they'll ask the jockeys, hey, I want a commitment, but I also want it all the way through the Belmont Stakes. So, if you're going to take the mount in the Derby, if we get lucky, we'd like you to take the mount all the way through, not have maybe a horse you rode that's going to skip the Derby for whatever reason, and then you're going to ride it in the Preakness. You say, and that's a rare thing,
It's tough to get a call like that from the top guys. It's tough.
It's tough to get the call, but sometimes, a good example of this, and he's actually won the Derby a couple times, is Mario Gutierrez. I mean, here's a loyal owner, trainer, jockey combination that he's their go-to guy. I believe he's on, like a salary type rider where you're like Europe, he's your first call rider. So whoever the trainer may be, but oftentimes Doug O'Neill, and he's been able to win 2 Kentucky Derbies with that, and for a guy that you would think, boy, that would be the first, he kind of flies under the radar, and you'd think, hey, let's, get one of these big name jockeys. And the phone was ringing, on those horses. And so Nyquist, I'll have another, I'm sure the phone was ringing, hey, you should, but just like you said, I go with Jim, I like to be a loyal guy. And, if you did put in the work and you rode the horse getting to this point, I'm going to see it through. I'm going to sink or swim with you because you took a shot on me. And that's what I would go with.
I agree 100%, and I think a good example of the opposite. And again, no knock on a trainer at all. He did what he thought was the right call, but I just thought it was a terrible call, and it turned out not to work out. But I thought when Umberto Rispoli won the Santa Anita Derby on Rock Your World, and they took him off to ride Joel Rosario, who was a long-time regular rider for John Sadler. I just thought that was a horrible move, and I felt it was going to backfire. And the horse actually never ran a good race again after that. But you know, I thought that there should have been some loyalty there to the guy that got you to the dance, and there wasn't. And you know, there's that school of thought. And I think that, you know, in the Derby, it winds up, you know, all getting forgiven. I side with you guys. I would like to consider myself a loyal guy and would stick with the guy that I was riding. And I would definitely, as Jim alluded to, I would definitely look for a rider. If I had a horse that I thought was on the Derby trail, that was going to stick with my horse and ride my horse all the way through, and work with me and try and, you know, work together and get that reward, than taking a guy who's on top of the world and is going to jump from mount to mount and do what's, you know, best for them, as opposed to what's best for us. You know, if you can get a guy like, you know, Junior Alvarado or Kendrick Carmouche, or, you know, one of these guys that's, you know, doesn't maybe get as many opportunities as the top guys, but when they do get the opportunity, can produce. I'd take one of those guys and stay loyal to them and let them ride my horse all the way through. And even tell them, don't worry, if we get beat, it ain't your job on the line. You know what I mean? I mean, even if you make a mistake or get beat, you know, we'll come back and get them next time. We'll learn from it and go that route. But I don't think there's a lot of people who play the game that way, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. One last point on Gun Pilot. He certainly has a Kentucky Derby winning name. I could see, you know, Larry Colmus screaming Gun Pilot, you know, firing down the stretch, or, you know, something.
Yeah, no, Larry's good with coming up with those kind of things, for sure. And he's definitely got the pedigree, and he's definitely got the name. So, we'll see if he's got the speed and the talent, and staying power to get it done. But I happen to like him a lot on Saturday, and I think he's going to run a really, really big race and, you know, probably win it.
One last thing to touch on the Derby Radar show for this week. A lot of we've touched on it a little bit so far throughout the show. Some big name horses moving out of Bob Baffert's barn to other trainers. John, let's start with you on that topic from the handicapping angle. How does that play in? Is it you know, what you see on social media where, you know, let's just say Tim Yachtine, for example, is the paper trainer, and Baffert's still pulling the strings, and, you know, you don't read too much more into it than that? Or are you looking at it from you know, it's a completely different trainer, completely different barn, and that's going to weigh into how you handicap those horses moving forward?
It definitely plays into how I handicap. Okay. You know, Bob Baffert's record in big races speaks for itself. Okay. He wins them. I don't think anybody gets horses ready for the big races any better than Bob Baffert does. And it's been that way for a long time. So if Bob's bringing a horse over, I think anybody who's betting money that doesn't pay attention to that is just a fool. You've got to pay attention to that. There are certain guys out there that merit that respect for my money, and he is absolutely, you know, one of them. So yes, and that's no knock on anybody they move these horses to. It's just, that's my feeling. Now, you know, I look at making a bet on a horse race as an investment in that race, you know, same way somebody would invest in a stock or invest in a business. Okay. I look at it differently than the average player look. So if I'm investing my money, I want everything the way I want it, and I want every edge and every angle that I could have. And Bob is an edge. There's no question about it. So I factor that in. As far as it being him training the horses, I don't think that is what's happening at all. I think that because of the scrutiny he's under and because of the way the suspension went down, I think that he is very cognizant of what the rules are, of what he's supposed to do and what he's not supposed to do. And I think he will play it 100% straight. Now, that doesn't mean that if I'm Bob and I'm sending a horse over to Jeff, that when they walk the horse a couple of barns over to Jeff's barn, I'm not going to say, hey, Jeff, just a heads up, this horse has a bad tendency to lug in when he works out in the morning. We work him with a ring bit or something like that. You know, good luck. I don't think that's a violation of anything. I think that's just a normal heads up about a quirk. But that would probably be the extent of anything I think that would be said or something like that. Then the horse would go to Jeff. He would do whatever he would have to do. And I think that with a lot of these horses, I think that it's understood that they're moving for the Derby and they're going to go back to Bob after the Derby because he is allowed to run in the Preakness and the Belmont. So I don't think he's going to lose a large portion of it. He may lose a couple. And you know, the horse that run last week, Harlow Cap, that went to Steve Asmussen, the owner of that horse has other horses with Steve Asmussen. They may leave that horse with Steve Asmussen. I don't know. And I think it's more difficult to take a horse and give it to somebody like Steve and expect to get it back because you know, guys like Steve and Pletcher and Chad Brown, these high profile guys, they may not want to take a one and done, even if it is for the Derby. But then again, they might. I don't know the answer to that or the intricacies of that. But I think a lot of the horses will go back to him after the race, which is similar to what happened last year. But it definitely weighs into my handicapping, who's bringing that horse over and who's putting those finishing and final touches on those horses. I mean, you know, Bob's got that patented, you know, 6 furlong, 111 and change, 112 work leading up into some of these big races that when you see it, you just know they're going to almost always fire. You know, I can't say that about, you know, some of these other trainers. I thought Brittany Russell was an interesting person to wind up. I read she's winding up with some of the horses. I thought that was an interesting, you know, new name. Tim Yakteen, who's, you know, got a long-standing relationship with Bob, I don't think was a surprise. Steve Asmussen, I don't think was a surprise because with Harlow Cap, he has horses with that owner anyway. So I don't know. I think it's, you know, it's a dynamic that will factor into my decision making as I play the preps because of the early move on February 28th, and as I play the Derby for sure.
Jeff, what do you think about the horses themselves getting into a new situation, new surroundings with, you know, really arguably the 2 or 3 biggest races of their young careers coming up here? Just from the mentality of the horse, what's at stake there in that regard, in your opinion?
So I think that not only, you know, Bob does a great job, like Jon said, and he knows how to get them ready for these big dances. But he also starts with the cream of the crop. These are not $20,000, $30,000 horses that all of a sudden they're in grade 1 stakes. I mean, they're $1-2 million horses. 500,000 is the bottom end. And so these are quality horses. So because quality horses tend to have a lot of class, very sensible, they're big, strong horses. And I think that is going to carry over, you know, even to all the trainers that are going to get these different horses. One of the things that I think you talked about the suspension last year, and when Sean McCarthy was running a lot of the horses for Bob Baffert, previously trained by Bob Baffert, I mean, they were running, they were winning. And so I think it's the same thing. It's like, these are such quality horses. that they're going to go to the new barn and they're going to adapt very well. The riders are going to enjoy the horses that they're getting on because they're quality animals. They're powerful, they're strong, they're fast. And I think these are things that they're not going to be too affected. The very subtleties of, different groom, different feed, different, but again, Jon stated it that more than likely they're going to say, hey, here's the feed, here's his shoeing, worming date, here's everything, things to look out for, whatever it may be. Keep him on ulcer medicine or whatever the quirks may be on the horse, certain kind of blinker, certain kind of bit. But I think the horses are going to adapt very well, and they're quality animals with a lot of class. And I think they're going to still run as well, even though somebody else's name is going to be in there. So I think they'll adapt good. I don't think they'll run too different. They'll still run true to form if they're training well and healthy and doing well.
Another thing, I think it's no secret that Bob puts a lot of foundation into his horses, and they very rarely come up short. I mean, off layoffs and first time out, you'll very rarely see one lose because they come up short. They're just not, sometimes good enough or fast enough to win. So that foundation will still be there as well. You know what I mean? That they won't lose that, so to speak.
One of the points that Frank Miramontes made in, once in a while he'll do the handicapping show, but he made a good point, and I noticed this too, that you don't see Baffert horses, if they don't win in their first 2 or 3 starts, they often don't win, and you see them in the maiden claiming races because Bob does put that foundation on them, and he works them in company. He works them out of the gate in company, and they might have 4, 5, 6 furlong drills in company out of the gate. So when they run, even though they're first time running, they've had a lot of race experience. They've been behind horses. They've taken dirt, these kind of things. When you have a big barn and you have plenty of horses to go in company with, these are little things that you can do to just make sure your horses are ready to go at first time out. He likes to win first time. He likes gate speed. He likes to be in the clear because there's a lot less traffic when you're on the lead. And like you said, he knows how to put the foundation into them to where they don't get too tired and they gallop out well after their races.
It's interesting you say that, and to get a little off the Derby topic, but stay on it somewhat, to just bring up something that we did a show on Past the Wire Unfiltered a while ago about is, quote, re-breaking, and people defining re-breaking differently. And a lot of times people will say, oh, look at Bob's horses, they re-break. Look at, Todd's horses, they re-break. Look at, Chad Brown's horses, they re-break. A lot of that is not really, quote, re-breaking, and a lot of it is not a nefarious type of re-breaking. A lot of it ties into what Jeff just said. If you watch Bob, Chad, Todd, and some other trainers that have barns full of quality horses trained, they go out in sets, they train together, they go, 5/8 of a mile, 6, 3/4 of a mile together. They let one take the lead, the other one comes up alongside of him. They get a lot of that kind of training and education. And then you'll see a Bob horse first time out, on the lead by 1.5 lengths right out of the gate. Okay. You'll see Johnny, whoever's riding, Juan Hernandez, whoever it is, take a hold, give him a little breather around a half mile. Another horse will come up to him. They'll turn for home. They'll shake the reins at him and they'll take off again. Well, average fan says, oh, look at this. He's re-breaking. Something's going on. Horses don't run like that. Well, not everybody can train the way that Bob can train because they don't have a barn full of horses do that. And when that horse is doing what some people are calling re-breaking, he's really only doing what he's been taught to do in the morning, which is accelerate at that point after he gets challenged. And if you watch these guys train and go out in the morning, and Jim, we've done that at the Breeders' Cup. Jeff, you see it every day. A guy like that, when he's competing against a guy who's got 1 or 2 or half a dozen horses and he wants to work a horse in company, he's got to go out there and say, hey, anybody working a horse today? I want to work my 2-year-old in company. And he's got to hope somebody's willing to work in company with him and not do all of those things that I just described. What's the odds of that guy's horse responding the same way Bob's horse is going to respond when he gets into that same situation first time out? Slim and none, almost. You know what I mean? Unless it just happens to be one of those special animals.
And the thing that you said is the thing when they, especially Bob's horses, they break so good. And when they're going out on the lead, they have a high cruising speed. So they're not really taking a lot of energy, and they're very, they're purchased for a good price because they have great conformation, good pedigrees, all that. And what happens is they have this high cruising speed. So it's really not taking as much out of the horse as those ones that are pushing to get up to the Baffert horse. So then once they do get to him, he's still got all his air still in the tank, and then they go. And the rider asks him, and then they go. But whenever you see it in races all the time, when the guy's going easy on the lead, and whoever the trainer is, if they're going easy, and when the horse have to come to him, that's when they use all that energy to get to him. They can't go by him because they've used all their energy just to get to him. And then the leading horse can go on with it and finish strong because they haven't even used their energy yet. So, and I think that takes us back to the Derby, where you're going to have front runners, you're going to have mid-pack horses, you're going to have closers. And this field, which 99% of the time is full with 20 horses, it's they're going to have to make their own way. They're going to have to be able to take adversity. Speed horses often aren't left alone, and mid-pack and closers are going to have to make their trip and find their way through. So it's going to be interesting these next couple of weeks as these Derby preps start to kind of show you who the cream of the crop is, who's rising to the occasion. And it'll be fun to see this jockey, as people say, jockeying for position and jockeying for horses.
There'll be
who they're going to
with
ride.
the jockeys for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Jim, maybe we'll be able to do a show at Saratoga this year on some morning workouts where you could kind of show, Todd and Chad, who I know train that way. Bob's obviously not there; he's in California. But where you could show how they train that way and why, when their first time starters, turn for home and they've got that extra gear that other guys' horses don't have, you'll see in the morning how, Todd and Chad put that into those horses and have the barn full of horses that enables them to do that. And, in my opinion, it's an advantage.
Yeah, I think
it's not an illegal or an unfair advantage, but it's an advantage.
Yeah, there are a couple instances just hanging around the Oklahoma track in the mornings, just seeing a lot of Chad horses, running in tandem or,
neck and neck. You can't separate them. Right.
Yeah. Or even, 2 by 2, two in front, 2 right behind. Todd doing the same thing. You've got Christophe Clement's entire string out there doing that European style of
which we saw at the Breeders' Cup with the Godolphin and O'Brien horses and how they trained. They were training in sets of 2 behind each other, and they're going to they see everything in the morning that they're going to see in a race.
Yeah. They're all lined up around the outer edge of the training track and in single file, and and then they all kind of peel off together. It's interesting. The casual observer is just, standing there like, wow, look at all these, beautiful horses just kind of galloping around in the fantastic Saratoga weather. And then, the more seasoned horse player, if you will, is kind of looking at it like you are, okay, whose barn is this? How are these horses working? How are they working together? How do they come out onto the track? How do they leave the track? Which everyday riders are on them in the mornings. All of that stuff is certainly interesting and on full display for anybody who cares to take it in.
Yeah, and we'll have a lot of Derby work coverage. Most of those horses work on video now. We can see it all, so we'll be able to tell a lot of that stuff. And there's always every year one work that everybody raves about and just latches onto. So it'll be interesting to see who throws in the eye-catching work that everybody's talking about this year that drops the odds a couple of points for sure.
Yeah. All right. I think we covered a lot of ground here. We'll see what happens in the Rebel at Oaklawn Park on Saturday, and then we'll be back next week to break down that race and then look forward to a handful of Derby preps March 4th weekend across the country.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. Always a pleasure talking to you two gentlemen and everybody else talking horses. So ciao for now. Nobody does it better.